Hi, welcome to Go Far Girl. Today I'm here with Brittany, and she's here to talk to us all about the Southwest and how that aspect of the country has changed her view on the world and travel itself. Brittany is the founder of Travel the Southwest. It's a travel blog dedicated to hidden gems across the American Southwest. Raised near the Salton Sea and now based in Arizona, she brings a deep personal connection to the region, with a focus on Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. Brittany highlights lesser known destinations, state parks, scenic byways, indigenous lands, and small towns, offering travelers a richer, more respectful way to explore. Her mission is to promote mindful travel that supports local communities, honor native cultures, and celebrates the natural beauty and diversity of the region. I love the Southwest, so I'm super excited to dig a little deeper. We are going to get to share two different episodes with Brittany because she has so many amazing stories. I couldn't compact it all into one. But in this episode, Brittany's going to share with us a really powerful story of early travel experiences that kind of opened her eyes to challenging realities, ultimately helped her find her voice and purpose. So I'm just going to turn it over to Brittany and let her take us back to your first visit on the reservation and kind of give us a little background there.
Sure thing. So nice to meet you. I guess I have met you, but I already know you, but
Yeah.
so good to be here, I should say.
Yes, thanks for
Yeah.
being
So
here.
I'll say my first visit to that reservation, I lived on the White Mountain Apache Reservation, Fort Apache technically, but the White Mountain Apache people. And my first visit to that reservation was actually pretty late on in my journey to really learn more about those cultures. So I have to go way back. I
Let's
was
do
raised
it.
by my grandma. I was raised by my grandma, and my grandma was Shawnee, and she always had that part of her life kind of taken from her because she didn't really know her father. And back in the 50s, some of us can't even comprehend this now, but interracial relationships were illegal, right? You could not marry outside of your race. So the way that my grandma grew up was that, okay, that just didn't happen. And it was kind of like you're out of that part of your family's life, which is really sad to think about, that she had this whole part of her heritage that she really never knew. So when I was growing up with her, we really tried to pursue that as much as we could, right? We went to powwows as much as we could. And I know you may not be able to see me depending on where you're watching or listening, but I'm very much a white woman, right? Like you look at me and you say blondish hair, blue eyes, right? But my grandma, we had this little look into, a whole other world and culture than what I knew. So that was already interesting. And I always had an interest in it. I wanted to connect that part of not even really my heritage, but her heritage, because I just, I loved that part. I loved how curious she was about it. And that really led me to want to travel more of the Southwest, which funny enough, I didn't really do until really the last like 10 years because I kept traveling abroad and like doing all these seasonal jobs.
I
So
know.
it's really only recently that I'm like, okay, no, I'm really going to commit to like getting to know my home because I'm going to live here for the foreseeable future. So that's how far back it goes. And I would just get these little snippets, like one visit to this place here and there, one visit to this reservation. Okay, learn a little bit about that tribe. And then when I started really learning and digging and getting into maps and things, because I'm also a map nerd, like I will just spend like an hour looking at maps, I realized that actually where I grew up, I was right across from another reservation. So I started learning more about like land rights and how that affects so many things and how travel and tourism are so inextricably linked to these different things that we maybe don't consider, especially if we're in the tourism industry, like for those of us who are listening, who are travel bloggers and things too. So lots of little touch points throughout my life. And then when I was working a full-time job actually in parks and community rec, which I thought was one of my dream jobs, funny enough, my grandmother passed away pretty suddenly. And that really wrecked me and rocked me. At that point, she had been like my mother, right? And I realized, like, wow, there were all these things I said I wanted to do or that I was interested in. And I realized I hadn't really been pursuing them. I was spending so much time working, thinking about basically how to make money. So I was like, okay, I need to like figure this out. I want to spend more time with my family because you never know how much time you actually have left with them. I want to spend time with my birth mother because I didn't really get to know her. So all of these factors were like basically I need to have a new job and a new life, and thankfully my husband so supportive and was like, "Okay, let's move." So I started looking for jobs. I looked for teaching jobs because that made sense with what I was doing. It was a good, like a pretty easy-ish transition, although if anyone who's been a teacher knows teaching is not easy. So let me just say easy-ish, okay? But yeah, so I was looking at that and I found a few jobs on the reservation. And I was like, oh, yeah, that is actually something I'm really interested in learning more about. And my mom actually like nudged me and said, hey, there's a job because she was invested in this too, right? She wanted me to live closer to her.
Of
So she said,
course.
actually, yeah. So she said, well, there's actually a job like 40 minutes north of me. Wait, north? Nope, south. 40 minutes south of me. And she said, hey, if you take that, they actually have housing and things. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm intrigued. So yeah, so I started applying to jobs on the reservation. I was hired for one of them on the spot. And I just said, okay, that's what I'm doing. So, and then I didn't even say this part. Yeah, I skipped that part of my story. But like also between the time when my grandma died, like 3 weeks before that, I had also gone on my first international Europe trip. So that was another little peek inside of like, wow, I've really been working so much that I haven't taken the time to really like enjoy things. So it was like that with my grandma passing. And I was like, okay, breaking point, I need to change. So that really uprooted me. And then fast forward to actually living on the reservation, first year, being a first year teacher, and then also living in a completely different culture and having to adjust to really a different like set of priorities by the culture there than I had been used to. I was living in Phoenix before that. That whole thing rocked me. But the cool thing is, it forced me to slow down a lot. It forced me to really get introspective and curious and question things. I guess things that I thought were just assumed to be true. Yeah, it's amazing how reservations specifically, you can be just a few minutes away from being off the res, and they really are two completely different worlds, different cultures, and even technically legally different nations because a
Right.
reservation is a sovereign.
Well, when you were with your grandma and you guys started going to powwows and things like that, were you accepted readily? Like, was it a warm welcome, or was it kind of like, why are you here? And then, were you instantly just kind of drawn into the culture and wanting to learn more? How did that feel as a young woman going to something so different?
Powwows have always been very diverse and accepting. I've never felt like I was out of place or unwelcome. Really, it wasn't until 2014, 2015, maybe, when I feel like in the US specifically, so I can't speak to outside of that, we really saw some racial tensions rise and we saw some movements talking about that. I guess partially because I was like blind to it, just because also where I grew up. So I grew up really close to the border in Southern California. So I
Mhm.
was maybe one of four white kids in my school. Everybody I went to school with was either their parents were either like seasonal migrant workers, so they were there like 6, 9 months of the year. It was just diversity was always just assumed to me, right? So it was very weird to me then later when I was like, oh, like why wouldn't I be accepted? But the good thing about that was I think it did force me to think about like, oh, okay, there are some times where like maybe there are some things that are only like that I shouldn't be a part of or that I should think about. But powwows, no, definitely anybody can go to a powwow. And they'll tell you too, like a local tribe or community will say, like, this is open to community members or this is open to everyone. And they'll usually be specific. Like there are some ceremonies, like a sunrise ceremony, for example, is like a coming of age ceremony in the Apache culture. There are parts of that that are open to everybody if you happen to be around, but then there are parts that are only open to family members. So it's part of it is just being culturally aware.
Right, because I think there's a fine line between wanting to learn and honor those traditions without like exploiting them or making it about you, right? So I think that's a fine line that some people, might struggle with is where can I get in here to learn more without like being offensive?
It's hard to. I also probably have a different take than others who would talk about racial equity and things like that because it's so easy to walk on eggshells if you talk about these things or think about these things. I really do believe that people will see your intent and your heart in talking to them. I do think that there are some things that we should learn before we go anywhere. And that's like if you were going to another country, you would at least learn a few phrases, right? Hello,
Right.
please, thank you. I think it's the same thing for if you're visiting a reservation or learning a little bit about the history, not putting the onus on the person you're visiting to tell you or educate you. Like that's not really their job unless they're also working in tourism and they've taken that on. So I think there are some things like that. But I think in general, if you are humble and if you're open minded, like I've also said sorry for things like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was offensive because usually people aren't meaning to. If you're the kind of person who is willing to go to a place like that, I'm assuming, I'm making some assumptions, but I'm assuming you're already pretty open-minded and, sensitive and curious. So I think people can feel that. Now there is like some voyeurism and things that can happen, I think, with that. And I think some like, I hate using this term honestly, but white saviorism, like there's a little bit of that too in
Yeah,
tourism.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the way really to avoid that, one easy way is by looking for locally family operated tour companies. That's one really like easy thing you can do, right? Is like, is this tribally ran? Is this indigenous owned? Especially for places like Antelope Canyon, very famous landmark. Well, for that, what's nice is it's required that you use a Navajo guide, so that makes it easier. But there are some places where maybe the lines aren't as blur or not as clear, and so it's easier to hire someone who's not local. So I think there are things like that you can do, like a little more research, and that's what I've really been focusing on with this website.
I love that. That's such a good tip, is to always looking like you're trying to book local and helping out in that way. So then you were just on the reservation. You just lived there all of a sudden. So that must have been quite a change from Phoenix. What were the main things that stood out to you as being completely different? Was it a poverty level? Was it, uh, you know, f- did you find it more family oriented than you did? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'll say poverty never really shocked me because I grew up in a trailer park right next to a reservation. So I was already pretty familiar with poverty. And so that didn't really, really rattle me. But what did rattle me, I think, is the pace. If you even just hear the way I talk, I'm intentionally trying to talk slower. I get excited and I'm like, let's go. I'm a really fast talker. I like to move fast. So I've had to really slow myself down there. Now I live in Tucson, so I've probably picked it up a little bit more. But when I was on the reservation, I realized that the tribe has like a different set of priorities than I would coming in, and I'm going to say this as a Westerner, although Westerner is kind of a funny moniker because like Native Americans are in the West, but you know what I mean. Like if you come in, you're going to have a set of like what you think is professional. That's actually a really good one. What is professionalism, right? A lot of what we view as professionalism is adopted from whatever culture we grew up in. So I would go to meetings and I'd be like 5 to 10 minutes early, and then the time would come, and then 5 minutes pass, nobody's there. 10 minutes pass, nobody's there. 15 minutes pass. I'm looking at my watch, like, did I get the time wrong? And then when my other car was like, oh, no, no, that's normal. Like people will come in 30 minutes after the meeting starts. And I was like, what? To me, that blew my mind. But that's Indian time. And they'll even say, oh, it's Indian time. It's all good. Like there's no rush. And I'm like, what? I want to get out of here as soon as possible. Like I'm thinking, I
Yeah.
want to go home. But it's just not like that. So I had to kind of chill myself out a little bit. And with that, there are some other things too, like I can be in a good and bad way competitive. Like, oh, I want my students, I want my class to dominate. We're going to do a really good job. But that competition, while that does exist, it doesn't exist like in the same level. It's almost like actually, if you look at like Scandinavian cultures, they have this idea, Juntenhoven, where it's like everybody's equal, everybody's the same. And a lot of tribes have that same kind of mentality. Like no one's better than the other. Like we're all kind of in this together and we're all going to help each other elevate, which is actually really beautiful, but it's just different than I think the very individualistic American culture where it's kind of like, individually do your best, be the best. And there's nothing wrong with either one, right? I think both cultures can really learn from the other. And I think that's really what that ended up being, was like a lot of learning.
Did you feel like the tribes themselves are doing a really strong job of keeping the culture alive within themselves and teaching the young kids? Or do you find like that, quote unquote, the Western influence, is making its way into that culture and kind of diluting that as well? Or how did you feel about that?
That's such a good question. Tribes, if you think about a tribe like a government, then you can see how there are many problems and possible corruption just like we have in our own, right?
Hmm.
So it's hard for me to say that the tribe is like overall doing a good job with everything, because also I have an outside perspective. So it's easy for me to come in and say, well, you should do this and this and this differently. Like it's easy for me to say that. But from living there are some things where I'm like, oh man, like they have the funding for this. It would be great. But no challenge is really black and white, right? Like there are some things where it's maybe we see something and we're like, oh wow, this seems like a really quick and easy fix. But then if you think about, okay, well, who would do this work? And they say, well, we really want to hire someone who's Apache. And you go, okay, well, that shortens, that smalls, that decreases the pool, right? Of like, okay, out of these people are available. And then you're
Right.
going to force somebody to do a career. Like, so it's a complicated set of problems. I do think though that the elders, like the community, and I think this is probably the solution for so many things that we don't even really see. The community does an awesome job. Like one of my coworkers, Miriam, she's the best. She flew it in Apache and she taught the kids Apache and it was full immersion. Like I just actually observed her class one day, and from the minute you enter the door to when you leave, it's all Apache.
That's
So
amazing.
that was really cool. Yeah, and you can tell like the grandparents are really making an effort. It's a struggle because the kids, there are some kids who are genuinely interested in it, but in general, like kids are interested in stuff they can do right now for fun or for
Hmm.
stuff that's going to make them money in the future, right?
Hmm.
So I think that'll be the challenge is for the tribe and for elders is connecting like what they're learning now to how that can be beneficial to them later.
Yeah, I love that. And then what did you teach? Were you teaching more than one subject or?
So for the first few years, I taught fifth grade and fourth grade. And then my last year, I was teaching K-5 STEM or STEAM. So, which was so fun. That was like the funnest thing ever. I know funnest isn't a word, but I'm just going to go with it. So, yeah, I taught K-5 science, technology, engineering, and math. And that was cool because I got to develop that program. So it really just got to do honestly whatever I wanted as long as I could prove that the kids were learning. So that was really cool. And that's honestly what I believe is like experiential interdisciplinary education. I also think travel is education. That's really important to me. Is like when you actually live and experience something, you learn so much more than someone telling you their version of it, right? It's like
Yeah,
going
oh,
out
for
there and
sure.
doing it.
For sure. So then how long did you live there and teach? Because now you're not living there. You kind of made a
Right.
transition at some point from being on the reservation to, back to Tucson or over to Tucson. And then are you still connected with the different tribes and the people that you helped educate? Kind of how have you integrated that now that you're not living there full time?
Yeah. I lived and worked there for 5 years. And since then, I have done some project honestly just independently because I have a couple of different websites and projects, and one of them is specifically about living and teaching on the reservation because I have many teacher friends who are interested in teaching on the reservation. So I've talked a lot about that to make sure that people who are like me who maybe think they're prepared but when you go there you're like, oh, I'm actually not. To help those people before they go. But for the sake of travel though, I've just I've seen how not everybody is going to necessarily up and move there, right? Like that's not really realistic for most people. So that's one of the reasons I decided to have an arm of this of travel because there are so many people who come to the Southwest for so many reasons, right? The national parks, Grand Canyon, or they just have a layover in Phoenix. So that is part of what I can do now. And it's also something I feel that I can do where I'm not intruding, right? Like if I'll give an example. So I went to the gathering, which is like the biggest powwow in Albuquerque, New Mexico a couple years ago, and wrote an article about that. And also went to the Taos Pueblo Indian community. They've been there for over 1,000 years. Really cool place. If you haven't been there before, it's amazing. Um, and what's neat is the Taos Tourism Office is right there on the site because it's a living community, right? People actually live there. So, really cool spot to visit, by the way, if you're ever in northern New Mexico. And the cool thing about that is I was able to talk directly to the tourism office and say, hey, do you mind if I post this on my website? Do you mind if I take photos? Because one of their rules is don't take photos and videos, understandably, because people have come in because people are living there. They don't want you taking pictures in people's
Sure.
houses, right?
Sure.
It's totally understandable. But I said, hey, if I limit it to like where people's businesses are, because also in Taos is another really cool thing about it is it'll be like someone selling fry bread, and so the front of the house is like a shop, but their house is in the back, right?
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
public and then private. So I said, what if I just limit it to that? And I'll also ask for permission also from the person who lives there, right? If they say no, then of course. So I went through all these like checks and basically got an okay. And I said, awesome. So I was able to take some photos and write about that and share about that. And that makes me happy because I know that money is going directly to the community. When people go, they take out cash, they go buy there. That makes me feel really good. And then business wise, because I do have a travel agency as well, I feel good about booking somebody's a hotel and Taos because like I'm not taking money from the reservation there. You're not able to stay on there anyway, but you're able to go and support the community. So that's one thing that I feel it's really symbiotic is like I can like bring awareness to that area, get people to go visit there, and then still have a business and still feel good about that. One thing I would love to do in the future, I just haven't figured out how to do this. When I was working at the school and living there, I was able to, and by the way, I didn't live at a boarding school. I just want to make that clear for a second because it kind of sounds like I did. I worked at a regular K fifth school. It's actually a state run school by Arizona. So you wouldn't know anything different from visiting it. But I lived in teacher subsidized housing. So basically, the state leases this housing for like 200 years. So I was able to get basically
Oh my
free housing.
gosh.
So that's, yeah, it's really cool for someone who can up and move and teach there for a few years. It's a cool experience for sure. A way to pay off some debt. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of how I'm doing it now. But eventually what I would like to do, and I did this when I lived there, was I hosted a young entrepreneurs club because I believe there's something to be said there too about just also where the education is going. So many people on the reservation don't have as many options, I would say, for self-determination as we do in the rest of the United States because of just the way that things are there. So for example, if you do want to make more money and support your family, for example, you would have to, this is the path that most people take. You go through school, you go away to college because there aren't many universities on the reservation, right? So you're moving 4, 5, 6, 12 hours away. You're having culture shock because that's different. Your family's not nearby. You're away from your land. It's really kind of sad. And then where are they going to go afterwards? Because there aren't highly paying jobs on the reservation, or at least not enough to support how many people would be going through college. So you kind of have this problem where everybody's moving away, and people who do move back or who never leave usually don't make as much money as their counterparts who do leave. So you kind of have this problem, right, where it's like you don't get that economic progression. So I also believe that tourism and being able to start your own business there is actually crucial for so many of the young people coming up. Like I would love to see more tourism going back into the hands of people who are actually from the res,
Yeah.
and more small businesses in general, because you can like create a pop-up restaurant, make really good money, and set your own hours and have your own family there instead of having to leave. So that's what I would eventually love to be more involved with, but that's like a long-term project.
No, I love that though. That would be so fulfilling too. And then just be able to watch that multiply and just kind of change generationally too, because once one family starts that, then their kids are involved in it and it can kind of just keep going in that community. That's such a cool goal. Um, So what I love most about your story is just how you've taken kind of your innate passions, which is to help other people and to travel, and kind of worked them into this way that's really helping to give back and shine a light on a community that may not otherwise have it. So I think that that's so cool. And I love that you've taken your grandma's heritage and really just made it into this full-blown thing. I just think that, I mean, it gives me goosebumps. It's just so full circle and it's so cool. And I know that she had her struggles, but you've really helped just continue that legacy and highlight that. And I just think that's really amazing. So I want to tell you that.
Well, thank you. That's really sweet of you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really wish that she could see more of it because I know that she really wanted to do more of this, right? Like to
Yeah.
learn more. I think she did so as much as she could while she was here for sure.
Yeah. I think I don't know, this thing about death. This isn't a happy subject, but it's funny how it really can kick us into action sometimes when someone we love is gone, because it just makes everything, your perspective just change. I know when my dad passed away too, the last thing he said to me was, "Well, keep taking your trips." And I was like, "Okay, say less." Because, he had things he wanted to do. He didn't plan on getting cancer and, he didn't plan on these things, and they always, him and my mom, well, we'll do this later. We're going to do this later. We'll do this when we retire. And then they don't have that. And so I'll be damned if I'm not going to get that out of the way right now.
Yeah, I'm so thankful to my grandma. I actually remember, I didn't even remember it until you said it, but the first time I was on a plane was actually with her. And it was so funny because she booked a really short flight from where we lived to Bakersfield. And anyone who has been to Bakersfield knows there's absolutely nothing
I
there.
can smell
She lit-
Bakersfield right now just thinking about it.
it's so funny now looking back. I'm like, why'd she do it? But I think what she did was she just looked for the cheapest flight that went out and then back in the day because she wanted me to experience being on a plane. And I just think
Oh,
that's so cool because oh,
yes.
I'm actually surprised how emotional I'm getting about that. She didn't know that would become such a big part of my life. Like, how could she have known? Or maybe she did. I
Maybe
don't know.
she did though,
Um,
Brittany.
yeah, maybe
Like
she did.
that was
That's a
just
weird thought.
her planting her seed and now just watching the garden just bloom.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Oh
a
my
really
gosh,
sweet
I'm gonna
thought. Yeah.
cry.
I cry all the time. Don't worry about it.
I know.
Yeah, but yeah, she is the best. And I just think about like also what a trailblazer in her own right. Like I think sometimes we can take for granted as women like how much has changed in such a short amount of time. Like she was one of the first secretaries, which if you think about how big a deal that was to be working in the 50s and early 60s, like what a
Yeah.
wild time. Like yeah, so
Yeah.
it's really cool. She has some stories for sure.
Have you been able to connect with your family on her side now more? I mean, I know because she was not in touch with them for most of her life because she couldn't be. But then kind of once you started opening that door, were you able to connect a little bit more with that heritage?
I have not been able to find anybody on that side yet. I found some documents because I did a lot of ancestry and genealogy
Mhm.
work for like, 10 or so years, but just kind of getting dead ends because the sad thing also is a lot of the records that we would have had for tribes, they don't exist anymore because a lot of that stuff was basically burned or lost to oral because a lot of it was also oral tradition, right? And so
Right.
I don't mean for this podcast to be such a downer. I really don't mean for that to be, but I think it's good for people to know this stuff, right? So if you actually look at some of these laws, I would encourage you to look at the law timeline. They many tribes were not allowed to speak their native tongues until the 70s, some not even until the 90s, the 1990s, which is only like 30
Oh
something years
my
ago.
gosh.
So many family trees, so many traditions and things were completely lost because of just oral tradition. And it only takes one or two generations to lose that. Same thing with language. You were mentioning language as well. So yeah, there's a lot of that that's happened, and it's hard to find that unless they were also registered either in the rolls. So like anyone with Native American descent that would have registered descent, you would have like a roll number, and that's how you submit to get tribal benefits and things if you didn't just automatically grow up on the res with all that information. So I did look into that because I was curious to see like I know I wouldn't have qualified. Maybe my mom could have, but
Mhm.
she didn't reach the threshold. But anyway, so it's really interesting, but sadly that's why you don't see or hear a lot about the heritage because it kind of just like it kind of stops. A lot of that was lost, and specifically that tribe Shawnee in Oklahoma, which you probably know at least one person who says they're Cherokee or maybe I think it's Chippewa. There's all these different like Midwest tribes. A
Mhm.
lot of them aren't actually from the Midwest. They were actually from like Florida and the Southeast, and then because of the Trail of Tears, like
Had to
that's
move.
like where the last bit of it is,
Yeah.
which again, another sad thing. I'm sorry. But yeah, but I would encourage you though, before you go to the Southwest specifically, but anytime you're visiting tribal land, just look up a little bit of the history just so you know where you are. I think it also gives you just another added layer of respect for the land and where you're at. And also adds to your travel experience too, because there's so much history that happens in a place before we get, like this history of the United States, for example.
No, I agree with you. And history is not always pretty, right? It is sad, but I think it's important for everybody to know it. And like you said, I hope it helps you deepen the appreciation when you're there. It helps you kind of get a different outlook of why things are the way they are. And it makes you want to be more proactive and to give back and to, be do your part to keep that alive as much as you can too. I think that it's not a downer. It's terrible, but I think that if you just ignore it, it was kind of all for nothing, right? I think that you can't just turn a blind eye to stuff like that. I think you have to face it, even though it's really cruddy, and then do your best to not be part of that, perpetuating that any further.
Yeah, and I think that's the right attitude to have. I think for the last few years, it was almost combative. Like there was this, I don't know, I definitely felt it even on the rise where I felt like I was doing this kind of work every day to try to educate myself. I still feel like I have so much to learn, right? There's so much I haven't memorized. I have to go reference things. But I think if you're at least trying and if you're really actively trying to make better decisions, I think that is something good and to celebrate. And we want more of that. There's just no way you're going to be an expert in any of these things overnight. I mean, even the history is hard to find because because history is always biased, right? It's written in the
Mm-hmm.
point of the victor. So you have to go find sources that are legit. It's really hard. If it was easy,
Right.
then we would all know it already. So I give a lot of grace to people who are coming to this region who don't know those things, and that's one of the reasons that I write about the places I do, is because they're places that I legitimately do believe they should get more love, because maybe they don't come up first in Google rankings or AI rankings or however people are searching now. But then also because I know those tourism dollars are going like more immediately. And that's a whole other thing we could talk about another time, is like how the multiplier effect of your tourism dollars, it really does make a difference who you spend your money with, where you go. I mean, there are some places where the money is more immediately going into the communities, and I think most of us want that as travelers, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
want to like benefit the mom and pop places. We want to know that like we're helping someone's kid get ballet lessons or learn something they want to do, but like that feels good for us. I do
Right.
think that tourism can have a really positive impact, and I think most people don't want to be making decisions that don't do that. I assume the best in people and that they really want to learn. So yeah, just doing my part for that.
But I think it goes into travel in general too, not just the reservation and not just the situation, but anytime you travel, you get a deeper respect for the people that live there and you realize like how small the world is and how much you have in common. And, you know, it just anytime you're immersed in a community in that kind of way, you just get that respect. And I think that's why travel is so important. Get out of your own little bubble, realize it's not all about you, realize things may not just be the way that you thought they were, and see it from someone else's view. And then your view opens up. And I think that just makes everybody better in the long run.
100%, because everybody's learning from everybody, right? I mean, it's, I also don't want to paint the picture that there isn't like mutual cultural exchange happening too, especially like in the classroom when I was teaching. I had all kinds of questions, right? Because my classroom, this is not typical probably of most classrooms either, is that it was 99.99% Apache, right? Like it's a very like unicultural classroom. And that was so cool for me to learn from them. But they learned things too, because I had certain experiences growing up that they just didn't have exposure to. Or I'll give you one example. I took them, we were doing a parade. So I was being a chaperone with them, and we were in the town 40 minutes. Wait, north. Oh my gosh. I don't know why I always get this about that. 40 minutes north, basically where my mom lives. And it's very different, right? It's like very suburban. It's kind of a mountain town. It's a bit of a tourist destination in its own right. People come during the summer, like Memorial Day weekend. Everybody's up there, right? Memorial Day, Labor Day, 4th of July weekend. They're all up there for that. So I remember one of my students asking me, "Hey, how come they keep the dogs in cages?" And I was like, that doesn't sound right, cages. And I realized he was talking about the yard, because
Oh,
I was like, "Huh, you know what? You're right. Like, we don't really have like fences and yards on the res. Like all the houses are just kind of like open, like, and the dogs can roam, and it's very different. Whereas, yeah, in more suburban white communities, you see they all have fences." And I was like, that's so interesting. Like, what an interesting observation you made. I wouldn't have made that connection. So you get stuff like that too. So I think it's always like travelers and tourists, we also have an opportunity to give and represent wherever we're from, right? Like I really think about that. Like when I'm traveling abroad, I think about myself as a representative for the US. I don't know if everybody agrees with that, but I really do try to talk about even this stuff when I'm abroad too, because I'm like, yeah, American culture is so layered and rich. Like there's so many different regions, and
and we have our own
yeah.
stereotypes to break too, right? Like
Oh
no
yeah.
one just wants to be that obnoxious American tourist that everybody,
Totally.
hates. So we have our own stereotypes to break as well. But what would you say to a woman traveler who wants to dig more into this? What would be your kind of advice on how you can get into it, learn more, give back? I think we've touched on most of it, but if you just were to put it in a nice little summary.
I would say look into the place you're wanting to visit more holistically. So if you're wanting to visit Scottsdale, for example, look at the map of Scottsdale. zoom out a little bit, like actually zoom out on the map and say, what's around here? Because even just me thinking about Scottsdale, there's the Pima community nearby, there's the Yaqui tribe, the Pasqua tribe. So those are like three different nations that you could technically visit and contribute to just from going to Scottsdale. And Scottsdale is great, by the way. You should definitely go. So I'm not saying that when you take your trip that you shouldn't also enjoy yourself and go do the touristy things. I'm not anti-touristy things. I like that stuff too. But I think, yeah, just looking at what's around there and thinking, okay, what else is there? What can I add to my trip? Because it's going to enrich your life and your trip too.
Wishing we talked about this 2 weeks ago before I was in Scottsdale.
Oh,
feeling
yeah, that's probably
feeling
why
like
I
a
said
missed opportunity. Guess I'll have to go back.
no,
Shoot, that will be terrible.
no. No, and that's actually another thing I would say too is like, because I know it's so hard with the FOMO. There's like, I know I've heard people say, well, I only have a few days. And it's
Yeah,
like, that's okay. Don't pressure yourself. You can always come back. And every single time you come back to a place, you can have a completely different
I
experience,
love
right?
that
Like
so
if you were
much.
to go yeah, like if you were to go to the White Mountains in Arizona, like I just mentioned, so Greer, Show Low, Pine Top, Lakeside, these are really cute mountain towns where you could rent a cabin and honestly, you could not see a whole soul for the whole time. And many people do that. But you could also choose, you know what? I'm going to go to Howley Lake, which is a lake on the tribe, on the reservation, and I'm going to rent a cabin there and go fishing there. And you can have a different experience, right? So yeah, I think that there's don't give yourself the pressure. Just do the best you can and just keep adding to it over time because these things, this is a change in behavior and that takes time.
I love that. So I'm going to put all of your links in the description so people can find you, but go ahead and just tell them where's the best place to keep up with your travels and to learn more about the area and the indigenous tribes there. Where can they find you?
Sure thing. So if you're interested in the Four Corners region specifically, definitely start with the website travelthesouthwest.com. I made the URL super easy for you. I
Yay.
also have a Facebook group. Yeah. I also have a Facebook group all about this stuff specifically. So I share resources in there. Where can you learn? And I really do try to like make the effort of if I see an indigenous community, indigenous, oh my gosh, an indigenous creator, excuse me, creating content around that specific area, or if I find their stuff, I'm always sharing it. Like I want to amplify the voices of people out there doing this work too. So that's what I really see myself as more of a curator. Like here are all the people doing these amazing things in tourism. Here's where to find them. So Facebook group would be great for that. And then I'm also on Facebook. I know Facebook isn't the cool platform anymore, but if you have a question, you can always message me there. If you look for Brittany Verlenich, Brittany Roberts, Verlenich is my married name, you'll find me there too.
Or click on over. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us today, Brittany. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right.